All right, so we're going to take a look through some respiratory anatomy. So remember that when we're talking about respiratory system, we have the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. And that line is approximately right here when we talk about the larynx. So right now we're looking at the structures of the upper respiratory tract, and these structures in this model, a lot of them we're going to see in the up-and-coming module when we get to the digestive system, because of course a lot of the structures of the upper respiratory tract are dual pathways for both food and drink and air. Alright, so what we see here with this one is we can see that air can come in either in the mouth or in the nose, right? So we have the nostrils or the external nares, we have the nasal cavity. Inside of the nasal cavity, we have these ridges that are called conchae, superior and middle and inferior conchae. An individual one is a concha. Sounds like some sort of dance. In between those hills or ridges of the conchae are going to be the meatuses. So there's a superior and a middle and an inferior meatus. And those help to, as the air comes in, it helps to kind of mix it around, gives it a little bit of time to moisten and warm the air as we then send it on further. Connected to the nasal cavity, we have paranasal sinuses. We can see the frontal sinus here, the sphenoidal sinus. There are also maxillary sinuses, as well as ethmoidal sinuses. We do have a sinus model that we can see if we can find a photo of that shows those distinctly. But in this mid-sagittal cut, we can only see the frontal and this sphenoidal. All right, so as we get back to the posterior part of the nasal cavity, we get back to the pharynx. And the pharynx is the back of the throat. The pharynx breaks up into three parts. So there's the nasopharynx across from the nasal cavity, the oropharynx across from the oral cavity, and then the laryngopharynx that leads to the larynx. And the larynx is really where we're going to go from one common tube to a separate air and food tube, a separate trachea, and then esophagus posterior to that. So as we get to the posterior here, when we get to the pharynx, this is going to be the nasopharynx. We can see that we've got some of our tonsils here. So these are pharyngeal tonsils. That name kind of makes sense. It's also known as the adenoids, the most common ones that are removed if you're having problems with them. There's an opening for the eustachian tube right in this ridge right here that leads to the middle ear so that you can equalize air on either side of the tympanic membrane. As we move down further, we get to the oropharynx. Again, it connects to the oral cavity. Through here, we would say that this is going to be the hard palate and the soft palate, and then the uvula down below. So hard palate supported by bone, both the palatine process as well as the palatine bone. The soft palate is where we lose that bony support right through here, and then when it turns inferiorly, we have the uvula, the little punching bag in the back of the throat. So we've got the tongue here, and then down at the base of the tongue we have the lingual tonsil through here. We also have a set of tonsils right through here as well. So really three sets of tonsils that we can see, and they have that kind of glandular look to them. All right, so from there we get to the oropharynx, laryngopharynx, and then we get into the larynx. Now we can see the epiglottis here, right? This trapdoor that when we swallow covers the larynx and the trachea and shunts the food posteriorly down into the esophagus. Now again, with a mid-sagittal cut, sometimes it's hard to figure out what we're seeing here, but this is the hyoid bone. That's the mandible there, so we can see the spongy bone in there, but that's the hyoid bone right there. This is a section through the laryngeal cartilage, right? So we have the biggest one, the B, if you will, shaped piece that is commonly called the Adam's apple. Below that, inferior to that, we have the cricoid cartilage. So this is called the thyroid cartilage. We do have a thyroid gland that is surrounding it, but this is the thyroid cartilage. This and this larger piece in the posterior is going to be the cricoid cartilage, and then the rest of these are going to be cartilaginous rings, tracheal rings instead. C-shaped rings that hold the trachea open. Notice they don't go all the way to the back here. There's a trachealis muscle back here. The other things we can see in the larynx, we can see the true vocal folds right here, and then the false vocal folds along the edge. All right, so I think that is what we can see on this head model. Let's see what else we have. Now zoom out a little bit. There we go. All right, so this is the purple plaque. The purple plaque, which depending on the photo you have, may or may not have the purple background, but this one shows the full system. This is just a shot of the head where we're going to show the same structures that we saw before, right? So there's going to be the external nares. We can see the superior and middle and inferior conchi. We can see the sinuses, the frontal and the sphenoidal sinus. We can see some of that, the pharyngeal tonsil, the adenoids, if you will, up at the top here. Hard palate, soft palate, uvula hanging down there, epiglottis, thyroid cartilage, and then it gets a little messy down below that in terms of actually seeing the difference between our different types of vocal folds. Esophagus posterior and trachea anterior. Where this one adds to our knowledge is where we get down into the lower respiratory system. Again, what we've got is esophagus and trachea. Trachea comes down here, and the very first time that it splits, those are called the primary bronchi, first set of branches. So this is a primary bronchus, left primary bronchus. Then when it splits again, where we see here and here, we have the secondary bronchi, the second set of branches. And then the third set of branches are called tertiary bronchi, and they are way more numerous. And it goes on from there. Many different sets of branches, upside of 20. And then we get to the bronchioles, etc. after that. When we look at the lungs themselves, we can see parts of the lungs. So we can see the apex, we can see the base down here, and we can see that there's a variety of different lobes. There's a superior and inferior lobe. We also have a superior, middle, and inferior lobe when we're looking at the two lungs. So the right side actually has 3 lobes, and the left side actually has 2 lobes, because we're going to have this cardiac notch on the left side that we'll see in other models, and that may be one of the reasons why it only has 2 lobes. So it'll have a superior and an inferior. Meanwhile, the right lung is going to have superior, middle, and inferior. Better seen on a different model. We can see a pulmonary trunk leading to pulmonary arteries. They show here in purple. Should be blue, really, right? Because we have deoxygenated blood there going to the lungs, and then pulmonary veins coming back. So these are the sets of vessels that have the opposite coloration that we expect for arteries and veins. Down here we can see our diaphragm, the umbrella-shaped muscle that is down underneath the base of the 2 lungs. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for that one. Zoom out again. Aha! So this is also on the purple plaque. It just shows us the bronchial tree. It's a little bit clearer. We can see the hyoid bone. You can see the epiglottis right there. Thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, tracheal rings. Primary bronchi, right and left. Right primary bronchus, left primary bronchus. 1, 2, 3 secondary bronchi on the right side. 1, 2 secondary bronchi on the left side, because we have 3 lobes on the right side and only 2 lobes on the left side. Then after this, when we get out to these branches, we would just call them tertiary. Okay, one other thing, this inverted V, this little tent-like, if you will, space here is called the carina. So it's just along here. Well, I always like to zoom up before I go out, right? And this is another good view off of the purple plaque. It shows us down at the microscopic level, we can see some of our bronchioles. So this is going to be a respiratory bronchiole. There's actually a terminal bronchiole, the very last bronchiole after that. Remember, it goes bronchi and then bronchiole, much like before when we did artery and arteriole. We can see our individual alveoli. An individual one is called an alveolus. So we would have a US on the end here if we were talking about a singular respiratory bubble, if you will. Alveoli is plural, like cactus and cacti, alveolus and alveoli. Notice that I'm saying alveoli. A lot of people forget this first L, right? So think of a guy, his name is Al, and his last name is Violi. And then we can see some capillaries surrounding our alveoli, and we can also see some of our pulmonary arterioles and then pulmonary venules leading out. If we have a whole bunch of these alveoli as a group, then that's called an alveolar sac. And zoom, as I always do, before we click to the next one. This is the larynx model showing us some similar structures. A little bit more detail. We can see our, again, what's this bone? It's the only bone that does not directly articulate with another bone in the body. That's the hyoid bone, epiglottis, thyroid cartilage, thyroid gland, cricoid cartilage, and then our cartilaginous rings. We can also see some of the connective tissues connecting these. So this is going to be the thyrohyoid ligament. So you name the inferior structure first, then the superior structure. So this is the thyrohyoid ligament. Down here, cricothyroid ligament. Now this model is a little bit more interesting from the posterior side because we can see a lot of other structures that we couldn't see previously. There's that epiglottis. We can see some specialized cartilages as well. Some of our thyroid cartilage, here's the back side or posterior side of our cricoid cartilage, but you can also see 1, 2, 3 specialized pieces of cartilage that are anchoring points for things like the vocal folds. This is the arytenoid cartilage, which is kind of shaped like an A, up here, down there, like that. That is arytenoid. At the tip here, this is called the corniculate cartilage because it looks like a niblet of corn. That's what I say. So just right here where it says number 5 on either side. And then this little bump that we see right here, it's called the cuneiform cartilage, also seen on this side. And back here, this connective tissue back here is called the trachealis muscle. So there's connective tissue, sorry, but there is also some smooth muscle back there that allows us to compress the trachea and narrow the diameter of it when we're coughing. It also gives us a little bit of flexibility when we're swallowing and there's food going down the esophagus and kind of bulge in on that as well. Same thing here, but we can see true vocal folds and false vocal folds along the side. Again, hyoid bone, epiglottis, thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage. There's a little bit of our arytenoid cartilage, corniculate at the tip, and then cuneiform way up here, that little bump. This is just the bronchial tree model where we do the same thing where trachea, primary bronchus, left primary bronchus, secondary bronchi, 1, 2, and then all the colored ones that we see here and there are called tertiary, third set of bronchi. So make sure you do left and right on those. Remember that it is bronchus, singular, and bronchi for plural. This is just the posterior side where we can see that trachealis muscle. This is another view of the diaphragm, the umbrella-shaped muscle. We have 3 holes in the diaphragm. This one looks like more of a V, if you will. This is a passageway for the aorta as we transition from thoracic to abdominal aorta. So that does pierce, if you will, the diaphragm, but it does so more inferiorly. So at this point, it looks like just a little indentation, but it does go through a little bit lower. From there, we can also see the hole for the esophagus and one for the inferior vena cava, taking blood from the lower part of the body up to the heart. This is a picture from the Southern Dobson campus of one of their lung models, the right lung. How do we know it's right? Because we can see 1, 2, 3 lobes to it. Superior, middle, inferior. Apex, the pointy part at the top. Base, the broad part at the bottom. Again, we can see a better shot of the base through here. Now we see the left lung, and this little indentation right here is called the cardiac notch. Just seeing the larynx in the torso model with the thyroid cartilage thyroid cartilage up here and the thyroid gland down here, hyoid bone, thyrohyoid ligament seen through there. This is a view of the thorax. So again, we can see superior and middle and inferior lobe of the right lung, apex, base. There is our muscle. What's that muscle called? Diaphragm, if you want, just to remind yourself that there's a G in it. And here's that cardiac notch. Now we can see the bronchial tree, same thing, trachea, primary bronchus, secondary bronchi are going to be the gray ones that we see extending out like that, and then the colored ones out here are going to be tertiary bronchi as well. All right. So I think that takes us through most all of our respiratory models. I hope that is helpful for you. And if you got questions, just reach out.